You know that feeling when you're giving and giving and giving, but there's nothing left in the tank. You're just tired, you're drained, your patience is running thin, your spark is fading, and you're wondering how much longer you can do this. That might not be burnout. That might actually be compassion fatigue. In today's episode, we're unpacking what compassion fatigue really looks like, how to spot it early, and most importantly, how to protect yourself without losing your heart for others. If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker. And today's episode, we're exploring something that some of you may have heard of, but may not know much about, which is compassion fatigue. You often hear people talking about burnout and stress, but compassion fatigue is something specific. And those who care for others, there is a vulnerability of us experiencing this, and we need to be mindful because it presents in a slightly different way. Basically, the principle is that compassion fatigue is a cost of caring deeply, continually for those in distress or those in need. The difference is with something like burnout tends to build gradually with chronic stress, but compassion fatigue can hit suddenly, especially after a particularly difficult incident, a case, or a series of emotional, intense interactions. So whereas that burnout, we tend to get that slowly getting overwhelmed, slowly starting to pile up on top of us, feeling like we're maybe, treading water and drowning and trying to stay to the surface. Compassion fatigue can kind of feel it takes us out from nowhere. It feels it hits us from left field a little bit. It can show up in similar ways to burnout in some way, but it can feel like that loss of empathy, similar to burnout, but emotional numbness. I don't feel anything anymore. Reduced empathy. I know I should care, but I just don't. It can also have the irritability, the exhaustion, the brain fog, the difficulty in concentration, all that similar to burnout, as well as feeling disconnected or even cynical about situations. What's the point in trying? Nothing seems to make a difference. A real quote from a carer said, it wasn't I didn't care anymore. I just couldn't feel the care anymore. Compassion fatigue doesn't mean that you're failing. It means you're overwhelmed. It's your brain saying, hey, maybe I need a bit of time to process this particular load. It's different from that burnout where maybe I've got myself overwhelmed and I need to, lower the intensity of what I'm doing or the amount of things I'm doing. Compassion fatigue is about processing the emotional information that you're going through right now. You're picking up on the emotions of others. Those who are highly empathic are more vulnerable for compassion fatigue. You're absorbing the emotions of others, which means that you need to process that emotional content yourself. What would most of us tell somebody who's, let's say, grieving, for instance, that, hey, it's okay, it's going to take time. You need to process it. There's not a rushed process here. You don't need to be okay tomorrow. But this is exactly what happens. Those who care for others can experience a very similar sensation and feeling. The people who tend to be most at risk of compassion fatigue, well, those who care. Especially those supporting individuals with things like trauma or illness, dementia, or severe distressed and challenging behavior. Teachers also can experience compassion fatigue. if they're constantly emotionally on for students, it's hard work. If you've got students who are struggling with the work, but you've got to stay positive all the way through the day, that's hard going, especially if it's even outside school hours as well, especially if you've got children of your own, for instance, or maybe you've even got elderly parents you're looking after at the same time. So when's your time to not be okay, to switch off, to allow yourself to emotionally process the information? Parents massively, especially those who are raising children with additional needs or without strong external support. This is such a difficult challenge for any parent. If you've got a child who does have, additional difficulties or challenges, or you've got multiple children and maybe you are on your own, but we don't tend to have that same sense of community around us all the time now. Maybe your parents themselves are actually elderly and you're looking after them at the same time. There is a vulnerability for any helping professional as well to experience compassion fatigue. So although caregivers, teachers, and parents are particularly vulnerable, social workers, nurses, therapists, any support workers at all have a vulnerability. The risk is significantly higher as well when you have very little downtime or space to be able to process. One of the things that I spoke to somebody close to me about recently is sometimes she works looking after others and then she goes home and looks after her kids. Now, kids are a little bit older, but it's that I told her she needed to take those 5 minutes of just decompression time when she gets home. She said, the problem is when I get home, I've got to switch back on for my kids. I've got to be there to look after them and to nurture them. So what we've done is we've added an extra 5 minutes onto a homeward bound journey. It's 5 minutes. It doesn't make that much of a difference in the grand scheme of things, but those 5 minutes are for her to decompress. Even if she pulls up somewhere, 2.5 minutes away from the house or something like that, and just takes 2.5 minutes just to decompress, to take some breaths, to process the day, to take a minute before she steps back into it. It may seem like that's not enough, but the little makes a difference. You don't have to do an hour. You can do 2.5 minutes and then 2.5 minutes later. The other thing, so that downtime is massively important. Okay, this is where, we understand what mindfulness is, or it's a thing now, but we didn't used to need it because we used to have that space. The walk home, for instance. It's another thing you can do, walk rather than drive. Maybe it is an extra long journey, but it's that time of just you and your thoughts to process your emotions, to decompress. Another risk factor related to something like compassion fatigue is if you feel you're unable to make a difference. If you're trying to help somebody in emotional distress, but it doesn't seem to be working, you don't seem to be making them happier or helping them. Or maybe the system just doesn't seem to be working, or you feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall because you're trying to do your best, but there just doesn't seem to be any thanks or any understanding or any kind of movement in the right direction. These are all things that can feel overwhelming. You're not getting the success. You're not getting the high of a success. You're just trudging on with the challenges. Particularly vulnerable are those who are supporting people who've experienced trauma without supervision and support as well. Most therapists have therapy. Most hairdressers have therapy. And most hairdressers should get therapy because they're listening to other people's problems. They're listening to other people's emotional distress. And we naturally absorb these when we're kind of listening to people and engaging with them. Working with traumatized people is traumatizing. If you are helping somebody who's in a state of emotional distress, emotional dysregulation, not their fault, but they are struggling to cope with their emotions, then we're trying to keep them contained. We're trying to do the job for them. They're drawing us into that emotional distress and we're fighting hard for co-regulation. So we need to make sure we're keeping our eye on ourselves, that we're not being drawn in without appropriate coping mechanisms and appropriate support. The more emotionally invested you are in a situation, the less support you have, the more vulnerable you are. So parents, teachers, caregivers, think about what situation you are in at the moment. What is your support network? And if you don't feel like you've got a support network, there are support networks out there. You are not alone. Even if you feel, let's say as a parent, well, my family live away or they don't really support or anything like that, there is community groups. There is where even if it's online groups or there's coffee mornings or even going to the gym and starting a class, it may seem like, oh, I wish I had time for that. There is online things that you can do. There is so much community out there, but people have to go out and search it now. It's not just in your street, which can feel scary and it can feel overwhelming. So try and find that trusted advisor, reach out to an organization and take that risk to find some support, even if it's just somebody to vent on. And worst case, things like the Samaritans and things like that are there for exactly that purpose. So let's look at what compassion fatigue looks like and what we need to be keeping our eye out for. And maybe this isn't necessarily yourself. Maybe this is watching out for this in others. Anybody experiencing emotional disconnection. So you start seeing people as tasks rather than as humans. If you feel people or hear people using language where maybe they are a little less empathic, they seem to be forgetting about the feelings and the person behind. They're just focused on getting the job done. This is a warning sign there's some level of emotional disconnection occurring. Another warning sign is overreactions, or what we might perceive as a reasonable reaction. It seems to be a shutdown. They don't seem to be engaging in that way. So snapping at small things, or they seem to be going emotionally flat. So if you have a person, this is where noticing in others, or noticing in yourself, if suddenly you're snapping at your partner for little tiny things that just don't seem to matter. Or maybe your partner's snapping at you for little tiny things that just don't seem to matter. It could be a warning sign for them. Or if something that you know should have irritated them, that you know usually would irritate yourself, but you don't care anymore. You've just lost all kind of feeling, or you're just not bothered. That could be a warning sign as well. So whether you're going emotionally overreacting or emotionally shutting down, these are both warning signs about compassion fatigue. Guilt is another one. I hear it so often from caregivers, from parents, that it's a guilt for feeling nothing, that you feel you should care, you feel you should matter, you feel like you should want to go down and see your family member, or you should want to talk to your kids, but you're just not fussed. You're just not bothered anymore. You're not bothered about doing enough. You just feel being tired. You just feel nothing. Okay. These are all signs of guilt. Or if you're feeling constantly guilty because you never feel like you're doing enough, or you feel guilty because you're tired and therefore you don't feel like you're able, maybe you're tired from work and you're struggling to feel like you can be the best parent you can be. And that feeling of guilt is adding on to the additional emotional distress that you're having to process, but not giving yourself the time to process. Another one is isolation. One of the first things that tends to happen with things like depression is we tend to isolate, or many people tend to isolate themselves from others. We avoid colleagues, we avoid friends, we even loved ones, because they won't get it. They won't understand. Or I don't want to be a burden on others is another reason this happens. But actually that isolation leads to further downward spiral. One of the best things we can do to help us to cope with emotional distress is connection. Many of you listen to the podcast regularly have heard me sort of say connection before correction. It is about, you need human connection. You need socializing. You need to talk. You need to connect, because everything being processed inside is really difficult to do. So you need to get that out rather than holding it in, or socializing, or just having fun and getting that emotional vent, that emotional outlet. So for example, I remember talking to somebody who realized they hadn't hugged their kids in days, not because they didn't want to, but because it's just too much caring going on, just didn't feel like they could do any more caring in a day. And that suddenly was causing a disconnection within the family environment. So if you're feeling off, feeling numb, you're feeling disconnected, you're not broken, you're overexposed. You imagine like empathy levels is like a meter that you can only go so far, and then you go into shutdown. And because you're doing so much empathizing towards others or towards certain situations, you're overusing it. You've only got so many spoonfuls of empathy a day and you're overusing them. So what can we do? One is rituals and routines. I know I mention it on the podcast a lot, so far as self-care is concerned, but a 10-minute walk, 10 minutes of journaling, 5 minutes of deep breathing, listening to one song. That's what I said, put one song on the radio that you love, or one song on your player when you're driving home. Just listen to that. Anything to shift your emotional state. Do you have songs that really work for you to lift your mood? There's loads of songs that I use for very specific purposes in my life. If I'm going to certain events and I need to be on the ball, I need to be kind of in showman state, there's certain songs I listen to that bring me up. There's certain songs I listen to that let me vent, let me get my rage out a little bit. There's some songs that allow me to feel sad, and they allow me to encourage that emotion so I can shed a tear if I need to. That may seem like, I don't know whether that's cold, I don't know whether that's odd, but it's It's just a way of allowing me and giving me permission to go into that emotional state in a way that feels safe. And I've got a time spectrum on it that, hey, it's just for a song. And then I can shake things off and I can go back to things again. But the key here is consistency with that. Don't wait until you're drained. Make it part of what you do. I'm always talking about this in the podcast of don't try and be, don't react. Preventative strategies. Don't wait until you're already burning out. For anybody who cares for others, any parent, any business owner, anybody out there, you should have these things in place as a preventative tool, not waiting to see if you notice when things are getting tough. Also, set your emotional boundaries. You can care with somebody without carrying pain for them. You can't care more about other people's behavior than they care about their own. You can still be caring and kind and loving without having to take on all the burden yourself. Try and find those trusted advisors as well. Debrief regularly, offload, talk with a peer, a supervisor, even a voice memo to yourself if you've got nothing else available, just to vent. Venting is not complaining, it's a release valve. As long as you're not doing that all the time and you're not a burden if you're just having a moan for a short period. If all you do is moan, then of course then people are going to get fed up with it. But you're just going, hey, I just need to vent for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even half an hour. Even an hour, can I just vent today and then go back to being the more positive you? One good thing that you can think about though is for those of you in a working environment, but anybody, this is where reaching out to community groups, forums, charities, anything like that, surrounding yourself or finding other people who get it, who are going through it as well, who understand it. One of the nicest things, if you can find people around you who are going through similar things. So, I have different groups I belong to that understand some of the different challenges that I have to deal with in my life. So I've got, as a business owner, I have my business group that I can vent to, I can talk to, I can go, hey, this is tough this week. And as carer, I had the carer that we talk to. And now we've got trainers where as trainers, we get together and we talk about the things that challenge us. Nobody understands you like other people who do what you do. So find those people. Create those forums, do those team huddles, get that WhatsApp group where you can have a moan. Doesn't matter, but connection keeps compassion alive. When you're already running on empty, when you're already struggling, if you're listening to this and thinking, this is me, I know I'm struggling, here's your plan. Acknowledge it. Just the first thing is admitting, hey, maybe I'm finding this tougher than I thought. Maybe I am shutting down a little bit. Well, maybe I am going into the zone of helpfulness. Or out of the zone of helpfulness. I'm either shutting down empathically or I'm getting overwhelmed by trying to help. Be aware of it. Name it. There's no shame. Being accepting towards yourself and compassionate towards yourself is the first part of this. Stop overcommitting. Set your boundaries. Look at what you can actually manage. You can't save the world if you're drowning. So what do you need to cut back on? What areas do you need to go, hey, I can't help with that at the moment. I need to take some time off because this is my focus. This is where I need to put my attention. And even if that's not on you, but maybe just cutting some of the other expectations or other requirements you have in your life down could be helpful. And don't be afraid to ask for help, whether it's therapy, whether it's a line manager, team leader, or you just need a break. You're not weak. That's wise. Trying to get this over to people all the time. It's not weakness to ask for help. It's wisdom to ask for help if you can't do it yourself. Give yourself permission to rest as well. I know I'm terrible for this because of certain scripts I have to overcome, but it might look like a walk. It could be a break. It could be doing nothing. It could be just a change is as good as a rest. So what do you not usually do, but you might enjoy doing, or doing something constructive? Sometimes building something, creating something, even if it's doing a jigsaw puzzle, doesn't matter. Doing something constructive with a sense of achievement that feels like maybe energetic as well is always beneficial. But always think about how could you block out a short period of time each week just for emotional recovery time. No calls, no tasks, just rest, just switching off. Okay, making it part of what you do. Compassion fatigue is not the end of the road. It's a warning light. You still care, you're still needed, but first you need care too. You matter just as much as the people that you support. You should matter to yourself more than anybody else matters. Because if you don't take care of you, whose responsibility are you putting it down to? So take a moment right now. What's one thing you'll do today that's just for you? Let me know. I'd love to share a few in the next episode or talk about them one time. I'd love to get some feedback from some of you out there that if you feel that self-care is something important to you, or sometimes maybe you're not very good at it, then how are you engaging with that? Such a common thing. I get people on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is self-care? Most people give me a really high number. But if I ask those same people, and how much time would you say you're delegating each week on a scale of 1 to 10 to it, and then putting it down at like 1 or 2, then there's something wrong there between those two. Either you don't believe it's important, or you need to be more self-disciplined and stricter with yourself on making sure you do that self-care. If you know somebody who is running on empty as well, if you recognize, hey, I'm worried about such and such, send this their way. Share this to anybody you think need it, but also reach out to them and let them know that they aren't alone. It isn't weak, and it's actually wise to ask for help. If you find anything in this episode useful, interesting, or you know somebody it might help, please pass it on. There are so many caregivers, teachers, and parents out there who I know are genuinely struggling right now. So please pass this on to let them know that they're not alone and there is things that they can do to make life easier and better for themselves. Otherwise, thanks for listening. Stay strong, and I'll see you next time.